Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. And today's live stream is with regards to in laws. In laws, it could be said, are probably a very stressful part of any relationship. So we thought we might as well block and tackle this difficult discussion. As you have been seeing, the entire purpose of the Happy Strong Family live stream that we produce and host every Sunday from Masjid Darul Iman in Markham is to have these difficult discussions. And with that, have those discussions with some domain experts within the field. And this time around, to discuss navigating the stress around having in laws or how to have that relationship with your in laws. I am pleased to have my guest for today, Sister Fozia Murtaza. Sister Fozia, welcome to the show.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you, Brother Mushtaq, for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So let me provide a little bit of a background. You are a stress prevention strategist. I have to read that out loud because this is the first time I think I've come across that. And hopefully there will be some more episodes that come out of this because stress, especially nowadays, it's critical. I think it's of utmost importance as to how we manage stress. Now, you are a certified facilitator for for the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, which was a series of mental health and wellness recovery workshops. You are also a certified life coach, writer, and speaker.
Yes, that's right.
All right. So, how about you give now some of your background? I do have a habit of talking on and on and on. Why don't I mean you've already submitted your bio, but I think it'd be better for the audience if you perhaps give your bio all the same.
Well, I mean, what can I say? I really think that, like you were saying, stress is something that we all deal with.
Hmm.
And so one of the things as I was going through my own journey and really finding my way to my wellness was learning all of these tools and all of these strategies. And the more I talked to people, the more I realized that I wasn't going through it alone. I wasn't the only one that was in a situation that was dealing with, whether it was relationship issues or, just trying to find what you feel you're supposed to be doing with this life, having that balance between this life and preparing for akhirah. Like, so there's so much going on, especially as Muslims. I think that we often put a lot of pressure on ourselves by making things really complicated and difficult. And so if we look at, what Islam teaches us, it's really about having that balance. It's not just preparing for akhirah. It's not just about living this life. It's about having that balance. And so as I went through my own journey and found that sort of sweet spot for myself, um, I realized that I could take what I learned and help other people just through conversations. And those conversations kind of turned into groups and gatherings and workshops, and now it just kind of developed from there. So currently I'm doing a lot of work with the Brain Injury Society of Toronto, where I'm taking
Okay.
these mental health and wellness recovery workshops and really helping people that have gone through an acquired brain injury, whether that's through domestic violence or trauma or an accident, and helping them put strategies together so that post concussion they're able to still have a life that's fulfilling and brings them joy. So that was a lot of work. I've done some work with the Durham Mental Health Services and Lake Ridge Health through an
Right.
organization called VACE, which is Voices Against Stigma Everywhere. And that's really about going out into the community and talking about the stigma that we all have, whether it's stigma with ourselves, stigma with, services offered, just really being ashamed of what we're going through and being afraid of talking about it. So stigma shows up in so many different ways. So going out and talking to the community about that. I'm a member of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, the Durham chapter, member of Happy Strong Family. I'm a member of Malton Women Council, which is also a phenomenal group that's focused on bringing information, resources, and workshops to the South Asian community. So that's kind of how I've been keeping myself busy.
So, Sister Fazia, let's get right into this then. In terms of managing the stress, and this is by far probably a very stressful relationship to have for anyone to have with the in-laws. And I think it's equal parts, like you say, the expectations we hold on ourselves, the expectation of the other, either the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, and then that dynamic, whether it's a dynamic of two families, a joint family system, then you overlay on top of that culture, then you will overlay on top of that deen or religion. It really is complex. But I think let's to kind of to deconstruct this now. Let's look at it within two questions, and I'll posit the first question up front, and that is, how do we set proper expectations and healthy boundaries then within that in-law relationship? Let's kind of tackle this head on. So how would one really set the guardrails then, Sister Fazia?
Okay, that's such a great question. Such a loaded question to start off with. But
Like I
okay,
said, we have the difficult
we
question.
have to have these conversations because
We have
yeah,
to.
yeah, it's something that our community really is struggling with.
Mhm.
And I've seen issues from just simple things to extreme. And I think, you know, we I don't think this is enough time to cover all of it,
Well,
but
that's
let's start with, first of all, what does Islam say
mhm.
about joint family system,
Okay.
right? Because it works in some places, and I know that it's more suggested and sort of followed based on different cultures and different traditions within different communities. Our South Asian community is huge on it. But if you look at it from an Islamic point of view, there are some flaws to the joint family system. Um, and let's just look at the Islamic point first. Okay, so
Sure.
for someone who wears hijab and you're living in a joint family system where you're with your husband's family and your husband also has brothers, you have to make sure that you practice hijab in front of them as well, right? So when you're living 24/7 is a difficult time to be wearing hijab. That's one thing. The other thing is, Islamically, if we look at it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave women rights that they didn't have prior to Islam coming. And one of those rights is that a woman has the right to have her own home. And just because your husband's family says no, it's not unless there's issues where he's not financially able to go out and buy a home, or for financial reasons you have to temporarily live with your family as a joint family, that's totally fine. But not even just that, but if you look at it from a human perspective, we all need to have our privacy. We all have the right to have our own privacy. We have the right to have our own space that we get to live in the way we want. So every woman should be able to be the queen of her own castle. This is a
Mhm.
beautiful thing that Islam has given us. And so when we take our traditions and override everything else because of tradition being followed a certain way, we run into some problems. Now, I'm not saying joint family system is wrong. I'm saying that it does work, but it takes work to make it work. And so when we're looking at that, we have to understand the importance of respecting each other. Now, if you've come into a family, it's I think it's the son or the husband who's bringing his wife into the family. He's in a really difficult situation because he's in a position where he has a wife who is now his responsibility, but also he has parents that are also his responsibility. So he has to be really able to balance. And when I talk about balance, he has to be able to understand that his parents and his wife have a relationship through him. So his relationship with his wife is private, And his relationship with his parents is not his wife's responsibility. So we have to understand that from that perspective as well. So we can live within a home together, but we have to perhaps, like I'm saying, for young people, understand if you're living with your parents, that respect them, because that's the first thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, respect your parents, especially your mother, but both parents, respect your parents. But that doesn't mean that if they're speaking to you or trying to interfere or getting involved in the relationship between you and your wife or you and your spouse, whether it's son or daughter, between you and your spouse, the parents are wrong in this place. The parents are wrong. They're not supposed to step in and interfere. A relationship between husband and wife is just that, between husband and wife. And so I'll give you an example. If husband and wife decide that my wife is going to go visit her parents, whenever she wants, a few times a week, and that's between the two of them. His family has no right to put stipulations on that. They can't say anything about her going to visit her family. If she and her husband are going out together, they can't ask, where are you going? Who are you going to see? When will you be back? Yes, they live in the same home. Yes, if the parents are there, say salam when you come in, say salam when you're leaving. That's just respect. It's social etiquette. But to get married and bring your wife into your home, and now she is like an additional child that the parents have control over, this is not correct, and this is not what Islam says. And this is what creates problems in joint family systems.
Right. So I think, Sister Fazia, you're really deconstructing this as I guess um, really we are getting to the heart of the issue. And I think one of the issues at hand is it fair to say that there becomes this power struggle, if you will,
Yeah.
between the in-laws and then the wife or the daughter-in-law? Obviously, the son or the son-in-law uh, is just an important part of this dynamic. And like you rightfully said, I think it happens many a time whereby, and I'll be the first to say this is a lot of it is culture, but then it's for us to kind of take it upon ourselves to understand, what should be done, what can be done, what could be done, if that makes sense, because it becomes this really loaded, very heavy dynamic. How do you make sure the wife is comfortable? Just to kind of play this out, how do you then make sure the mom is comfortable, or and I think that is really where things break apart. The mom may very well say, hey kids, you know what, I expect you to be home. And then the daughter-in-law could be like, well, I want to visit my parents, right? And then the mom is like, well, no, you need to look after, this and this, or here are your responsibilities, and so on and so forth. This is going a little bit down very stereotypical gender roles, and I'm not comfortable with that. But that being said, let's just kind of play this out, Sister Fazia. How do we then really set the expectations? We're going at this at a very practical, pragmatic perspective. So hopefully the audience and the viewers can understand where we're taking this. This is not about gender roles. This is not about gender stereotyping. Obviously, Islam gives both, women and men their roles, their responsibility, the equity in the relationship. I just want to kind of level set that up front. And as a continual ally and advocate for our sisters in Islam, I'll say that up front, just to kind of level set what this or maybe reset what this live stream is about. But again, coming back full circle, what can be some practical advice here because of that dynamic, right? That power play. What can one do in this situation? And let's kind of look at it from all angles. The mother-in-law, the daughter-in-law, and the son-in-law, and of course the father-in-law is here too. So.
Right, right. Okay. So for each member of the family, they
Mhm.
they have the right to live peacefully. They have the right to be happy. There shouldn't be one person who feels that they're being abused or taken advantage of. And the way that we can understand or really establish those rules that you're talking about is through setting boundaries. And so when I talk about boundaries, boundaries aren't really, you know, telling people. Boundaries really are telling people what a consequence would be if they continued a certain type of behavior. So people often think boundaries are like, you know, you get to tell someone, you're not allowed to talk to me like that. Well, actually, we have no control over other people. They're going to be how they're going to be. That's their choice. But us setting a boundary is really saying, okay, I don't appreciate this behavior if it's going to continue, or I don't appreciate this type of language. If it's going to continue, then XYZ, whatever the consequence would be. And then you have to stick with it, because if it's difficult to put boundaries in place where with people that you haven't set boundaries before, because there's obviously going to be pushback. They're going to be all of a sudden, why am I not allowed to, you know, why am I being told I can't talk to you like this? Why am I being told I can't tell you what to do? But we have to set those boundaries for ourselves and for others. And it sounds like it might be a mean thing, but boundaries actually allow a lot of freedom, because they create very clear goals. And when you have clear goals and you're navigating within the goals or the rules that you've set within the family dynamics, it really allows for that respect for each other, and it really gets rid of that gray area, because some people know common sense. Well, I can't tell this person what to do because it's not my place, nor do I have the right to. But some people culturally will think, well, this person is living in my house, I can tell them whatever I want. So we have to set those boundaries, and we have to be able to really take a stand for our boundaries. When there's pushback, you have to sort of dig your heels in and just really, you know, honor your own boundaries, because if you don't honor them and if you give in sometimes, then why not just ignore them altogether? And that's how boundaries will be seen. If you ignore them when you get pushback, then people will know, if I'm not happy with this, I'll just push, and they'll say, okay, fine, they back down. Again, it has to be between the husband and wife, that understanding. Now, if your son is old enough and you feel responsible enough to get married, think of it this way: you are putting your son out to start his own family. You're not bringing in a person who is now another child for you to take care of. So, as you know, for a son who brings his wife to come live with his parents, his responsibility is really like her expenses, making sure she's happy, taking care of her, all of those things. Her expense, whether it's financial or, you know, it shouldn't be put on the parents. I've seen that happen. It shouldn't be put on the parents, because that again is not right. And no one else other than who's responsible for your expenses should be burdened with your expenses. Now, I understand with today's, you know, the world that we live in, it's difficult to get newly married, go out, buy a house. Buying a house might be out of the question for a lot of people. Maybe rent a place. If you're not able to rent a big house, rent something smaller. If you're able to, within the home that you live in, try to create some rules where perhaps husband and wife can go into the kitchen, have their meals together, maybe not every meal, but at least have one meal. Because keep in mind, when you get married, you've got, you know, your spouse, parents and rest of the family have to allow that time for them to create that understanding, to build that relationship, to nurture that relationship. And if they're always surrounded by the rest of the family, it's difficult to do that, because who wants to stay up in your room all the time? You should be able to spend time in the rest of the house, but be able to still focus on nurturing your relationship, sitting and having a conversation in private where someone else isn't sitting there listening to everything you say, right? Now, let's look at the other side of it. When you are married and you bring your spouse to come live with your parents, it's not an opportunity for you and your new spouse to start telling the parents the way that they've been doing things and living things, like they should change. And, you know, maybe things aren't being run the way that the new member of the family would like things to be run. So that isn't fair to the parents as well. So we have to really look at that balance and make sure that everyone's rights and privacy is being respected.
So then, Sister Fozia, I think, let's now focus on pivoting. And I'm going to have to read this question very specifically because again, it's a difficult one. Navigating the challenges of living with your in-laws in that joint family, right? We are already doing this. We do have a question from the audience with regards to this very specific topic about the challenges. And I think the beauty of having a live stream is that we get direct feedback, we get direct questions from the audience. Producer Kashif is always in the production booth, being the producer extraordinary here. So I'll let producer Kashif read out the question, please, or you could put it up on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll read it out. Jazakallah khair. So yeah, this one came in. Um, so says I recently got married, and there have been many issues that have come up between the two families. My wife lives with me at home as a joint family and does not feel respected or comfortable living as a joint family and wants to move separate, but my mother is demanding us to stay at home. I need advice on what to do next.
That you're not alone in that. I'm sorry that you're going through that situation, but you're not alone in that. We see it all the time. So there's a few things happening. First of all, like I said, everyone deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. So if that's happening, it's your responsibility to have a conversation, even with your parents, and let them know that they're not allowed to speak to your spouse in a way that is degrading or abusive or anything like that. We have to have common respect for each other. Absolutely, that's one thing. The same thing, if, and I don't know the situation, but if the parents were to say something to the daughter-in-law, is the daughter-in-law saying something back? Because I've seen fights happen both ways. So then it's a conversation with the wife that, okay, I understand that there's a problem. You can talk to me about it, but you're not allowed to speak to my parents that way. So we have to establish the rules of respect from the beginning. In regards to moving out, if you're able to move out and support yourself and support your family, which is your wife, and I don't know if you have kids, but if you're able to move out and support yourself on your own, um, that would be advised to avoid further conflict. And if you're not able to, then you have to establish some ground rules. And perhaps part of the house can be, maybe if there's like, a basement, get the basement apartment made, and then perhaps you guys can shift downstairs. That way there's a little bit separation, but you don't have to carry the burden of going out and supporting yourself on your own if you're not in a position financially. I would suggest maybe looking at doing something like that. Um, if that's not possible, and for now you are and you have to stay as a joint family, one of the things you can do, like I said, is establish some ground rules around, like there's one kitchen. Perhaps you and your wife would like to have your own meals and you cook your own food. So then you would do that, and you have every right to do that. And your mom and your dad and the rest of the family can prepare their own meals. Just work it out so the timings are where you're not bumping into each other. I'm not saying to live as strangers within the same home, because, Islam really stresses the importance of keeping family united. But keeping family united doesn't mean they all have to live under one roof. Keeping family united means you have your own space, you have your own privacy, but when you meet with love and respect for each other. Nowhere does it say you have to continue living under one roof. Now, if that's not the situation, like where if you are able to move out, sorry, and like you said, your mom is demanding that you guys stay as a joint family, um, I'm sorry to say, but mom is wrong. Um, if you're capable of going out and supporting yourself and your family, then you should do so, and you should do so on amicable terms. don't do so where you're breaking ties, because that's against Islamic rulings as well. We're taught to strengthen our family. And oftentimes when we have that space and we can respect each other better, we respect each other's privacy. And when we get together, it's for a short time. That allows the space for us to create respect for each other. So if you're able to do that, I would recommend doing that, and have a conversation with your mom and your dad and let them know that you're going to be there to support them when they need you. However, you don't have to be under the same roof to do so.
So, Sister Fozia, would it be safe to say that the ongoing challenge really are probably two or three challenges? One of them being privacy, the other one being respect, and the other one just being the art of constant communication. Um, to have that communication back and forth from all angles.
Yes.
And then also with that would flow, hopefully, some sense of privacy, because once that's communicated, then you can establish that privacy. And then once you can communicate that with that privacy, you'll both, all the parties will have a greater level of respect, trust. What are some of the other challenges that you've come across in a joint family system, or even, maybe the families, the couple, they're not living with the in-laws, but the expectation is maybe they visit every weekend, or whatever. What other kind of challenges have you seen in general? Let's kind of take a step back and look at some of the larger challenges here.
Okay, so if you are living separate and you're able to go and visit with your parents, whether it's every week or whether it's a few times a week, or it depends really on distance as well, right? Like maybe you're not able to visit them regularly. There's other ways to stay connected, right? And since COVID happened, we all know we can do video conferencing. I mean, it's free to open a Zoom account, and you can send a Zoom link to everyone, whether you have siblings in other cities or around the world, and everyone can log in and you can have a family get together online. I've seen that happen. um, you know you can use a telephone, good old phone, and call. There's FaceTime. You can call your parents, you can see how they're doing. Do things to help them out, like maybe if they need help to get to appointments, go take them to their appointments if you're able to. Maybe when you're doing grocery shopping, pick up a few things and drop it off for them as well, so you're able to make it a little bit easier for them. There's things like that. The other thing we have to understand, what we're seeing now is, um, we're getting married with people from different cultures, which is beautiful, because we have so much to learn from each other. So when your child gets married to someone from another culture, keep in mind that not everyone does things the way that you do them, or the way that they were done for you back home. And so when you have someone that comes from another culture, be open to some change. Don't be so stuck in your ways that it creates conflict and friction between your families. So be open to accepting new people, be open to accepting new ways of doing things. Remember, culture doesn't come before Islam. And when you have families that come together and there's a real big difference in culture, look for the things that you have in common, and that would be Islam. And as long as you can focus on that, some of the other things just kind of fall out of the picture. I've seen that happen.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So the common denominator would be faith. Um,
Absolutely.
Beautifully said, and that does bring a smile to my face. Now, Sister Fazia, we do have a question from the audience, which I'll let producer Kashif voice out loud, and then there's also a question from him directly as well. Producer Kashif.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. So the question from the audience just came in on our Instagram. Now, I'll preface that by saying, like, we're not scholars, so I think it's asking for Islamic advice. So we'll ask you to consult with your local scholars. But if you didn't want to make a comment on this, husband doesn't want to leave home. Islamically, should wife move in ever, though it is uncomfortable?
Oh,
Well, That's a that's a
That's a
good question.
really yeah, that's a good question, and we're both kind of, almost would it be fair to say, Sister Fazia, we're almost cringing because that's a super super tough question, and like producer Kashif said, first and foremost, speak with your local imam or a sheikha, someone who has that kind of background. But please, Sister Fazia, take it away. What advice would you be able to give from a stress management point of view, or even relationship management point of view? Please.
Yeah, absolutely. First thing I want to know is, why does that guy want to get married? Is he wanting to get married because it's, a responsibility, a duty that we have in Islam, and he wants to have a family of his own? Like, what's the reason that he wants to get married? Or is it that, maybe our parents older and now they need someone to come in and help take care of them? Because, there are people that you can pay to come in and take care of family members that are ill or that are not well. It's not the responsibility of a son to go and get married and bring someone home who's going to take care of his parents for him. So we have to be clear on what is the reason that you want to get married. Now, if you want to get married and you prefer to have a joint family system, there are girls that will be very comfortable with that. But then there are some women that are girls that are not comfortable with that, and that's the key. We have to really look at what's comfortable for both husband and wife, and what works for your relationship as husband and wife. Because, like I said, joint family system is not a bad thing, but you have to navigate in a way, because if you're not careful, first of all, there are some flaws to it, which I mentioned Islamically. But the other thing is that if you're not careful, you can end up having, difficulty and challenges with your family, to the point where I've seen people are just cut off from each other. And that goes against what Islam really, um, you know, suggests that we do, is focus on uniting the family, keeping the family bond strong. And so sometimes the way you need to do that is to separate. But I would, definitely check with your imam. But my first question to that gentleman would be, why do you want to get married? Because be clear on the reason that you want to get married, and make sure that it's for the right reasons.
Okay, and then producer Kashif, your question, please.
Yes, Jazakallah khair. Before I get to my question, there is a comment that came in, so I'll just read that out loud from an audience member. So it is saying, MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair for touching this delicate topic. This episode should be a must watch for any couple that's thinking about marriage and living in a joint system. So yeah, we appreciate the support from the audience. Jazakallah khair for the
We
comment.
do, we really do. And again, we're having these uh almost cringeworthy, like kind of but we have to tackle these difficult, discussions. Now, I think producer Kashif, you probably have just a difficult question.
Well, it's not really difficult, but so yeah, obviously I have young kids, as you know, but me and my wife have already started having these conversations. If Allah gives us the opportunity, inshallah, what will look like as parent-in-laws and stuff. And one natural sort of phenomenon I've noticed is that if you have a daughter and her husband is treating you well, you're like, oh, mashallah, she's so blessed to be in a wonderful marriage with a wonderful husband that helps out and stuff. But if you have a son, it's the exact same marriage, exact same scenario, but now it's the son. Naturally, you're thinking, oh, wow, she's so lazy. Like, why is she not doing more? Why is my son doing the same? So it's just the perspective. And I think it's something natural that happens. So me and my wife have talked a lot about, like, how do we prevent that type of thinking, right? And those sort of natural perspectives and biases. And so any tips on that? Like, it's just, you see a lot
Absolutely.
of people, it's just natural. It's just something that comes out, but it,
Hmm.
it is problematic, right? So how can we sort of
That
start
that's a
implementing things
that's a
ourselves? Yep. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, that's a great question, Kashif. So first things first is, every generation we move a little bit, we gain a little bit more knowledge than the generation before us. So when we look at our past generations, they just did the way, things the way that they saw and the way that they were told. And then the generation, you know, each time, and then we learned, this is actually what Islam says, because I think there's more knowledge now and there's more information available and it's spoken about more, which is alhamdulillah, that we hear people talking and having conversations about Islam. And I know even for myself, so many things that I've learned as an adult that I had a misunderstanding about when I was younger. But what we can do with our generations coming forward is prepare them. Prepare them so that, for example, if you have a son, I've seen this happen, where if you have a daughter and she gets hurt and she cries, you comfort her. But if you have a son and he gets hurt, you say, boys don't cry. Well, why not? Boys can cry, boys can get hurt, boys can cry. They can have an overload of feelings. And so what we need to do is we need to eliminate those sort of stereotypes that we instill accidentally as parents. The other thing is when your kids are getting older, I've seen where girls are, sort of prepared to go and be homemakers, whereas boys are allowed to just go out and be aloof and whatever. So when your kids are growing up and they have chores, have your son do the same responsibilities that your daughter does. Teach him how to wash his own clothes in the laundry. Teach him how to do the laundry. Let him vacuum. Let him help to set the table. These are the things that we're going to have to do to help our spouses. So why does it fall on the spouse's responsibility to train her husband to do these things? The parents should prepare, just like, like I'm saying olden days, but generations before, they prepared their daughters to, how to cook and how to clean and how to sew and all these things. But the boys didn't have to do it. Well, everything you're teaching your daughter, teach your son, because you want your daughter to be a good wife, but you want your son to be a good husband, and you want your daughter to marry a good husband. So if parents start teaching their boys how to manage a household, they will make really great husbands. They can be hands on parents. Because remember, the generations before, maybe the women didn't go out and work, but now they do go out and work. So why does it fall on the wife to go out and do a job all day, same as her husband, and then come home and the husband lay around and the wife is responsible for cooking dinner and tidying up and washing the dishes? That's just not fair. If they're both going out and they're both working, the responsibilities at home should also be divided. And I think that if you teach that to your kids and teach it through example, not through telling them what to do, teach it through example, I think that's a good start.
Great question, producer Kashif. And I think it really comes down to, like you said, tackling and challenging our own biases, whether they're implicit, explicit, whether it might be generational, whether it might be learned, or even taught. And some of the biases we have are those tropes. The lazy wife, the lazy daughter-in-law, the lazy son-in-law. Maybe they're not pulling their weight. And I think if we take a step back even to a higher level and we look at the lens of Islam, from even our prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was an equal partner in terms of the household chores. He married a Khadija, radiallahu anha, whom we all know. But let's just take a lesson from her example, from her history. She was a very wealthy businesswoman, and she actually approached him and said, "Hey, I've heard about your character. I've actually had a personal scout kind of check you out. That's what was done back then. And my friend says you're marriage worthy. So yeah, I'd like to marry you." And I think if we look at some of these wonderful, wonderful examples from our own religion, Khadija and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were by far the best examples, and it's really up to us as to how we kind of bring those examples into our own lives. Do we want our children, and take a step back, do we as parents want our children to kind of grow up and be that equal partner? Yes, there is a specific role and responsibility for the husband, and equally there's a specific role and responsibility for the wife. If you are in that sandwich generation where you have to look after your parents, there are certain roles and responsibilities there. But like, Sister Fazia is saying, in terms of managing the relationship, managing the stress, let's just make sure that we communicate all around, make sure that there's a certain level of privacy, there's a certain level of trust. I think those would be the foundational pillars which are applicable to any relationship, whether it's the relationship of a daughter-in-law, a son-in-law, a mother-in-law, or a father-in-law, for that matter. Would you just to sum it up, Sister Fazia, and I'm sure we'll have subsequent episodes. This is just the tip of the iceberg, I think it'd be fair to say. But how would you kind of summarize this? We're coming up to the 45-minute mark. What advice would you like to further leave, or maybe challenge our notion, like you rightfully said? It comes down to tropes, it comes down to stereotypes. As I said earlier on, it seems like we're getting down the path of gender stereotyping and whatnot. But let's break that, because Islam is very clear. Islam is very, very clear. Women have rights, men have rights. The parents have rights over you, but then you as children have rights over your parents. It's all laid out there. It's up for us to kind of implement that and interpret that and then put it into our lives.
Absolutely. Such a great point that you made. And I want to touch on the fact, Brother Mushtaq, you're talking about communication, and communication is such a vital piece to this whole topic that we're talking about. Communication is really, because it's easy for someone to say something and someone else to assume what they meant by that. And I've seen this happen so many times in relationships, where when you talk to the individual afterwards, they'll say, well, they said that, so that means this. And we have to get away from that. We really have to break from that type of thinking. We can't read someone's mind. And if someone says something, or you feel that they're implying something, have a conversation and clarify it, so that your thoughts are not feeding you something that is then going to be, the initiating conflict with that person. So it's really, really important for us to have clear and open communication, and ask for clarification when you're not sure what a person is talking about or what a person is referring to. That's one thing. The other thing is that we really have to understand that different people have a different capacity. So when you have a new member of the family, and your family has a certain way of talking and a certain way of behaving with each other, and this person is a new person coming in, perhaps it's not familiar to them. So we can't automatically label someone for being a certain way because they don't fit in to the way that we are and the way that we've been doing things. And we have to, like I said before, we have to be open. We have to be open to understanding other people do things different ways. We do things a certain way. But if we're so stuck on the way of getting things done, or the rules that we've always had within our household, there's obviously it's going to be difficult, and it's going to cause conflict. And being so stuck in your ways, it's really not sustainable. But at the same time, it's like such a flip flop, because you want to make sure that everyone is respected, but then at the same time, like, now if you have parents that are much elderly, you can't put that on them, that they've got to be open to change. They've lived their life, and they've lived a good long life, and they do things a certain way. But again, respect them for how they are, respect them for who they are. And the other thing that I really want to say is, understand that when you have a relationship with someone and you choose to continue a relationship with someone, whether it's your spouse or your parents or a sibling or anyone, you have to accept them for who they are, and you have to accept them for who they are not. And what I mean by that is when we have expectations of someone, and maybe that's not within their capacity, or maybe that's not within the Islamic role that we have in that relationship, then and they're not fulfilling or following through with those expectations, it's not on them, it's on us, because we've set those expectations. So if we're going to continue a relationship with someone, accept them for who they are, but also accept them for who they are not. I don't know if that made sense.
It does. It does, Sister Fozia. And I think all of this talk of, gender roles and stereotypes has spurred on one more question. So, producer Kashif, please, this is an equally challenging one. Let's try our best to kind of shed some light on it. It's not an answer, but at least shed some light on the question at hand here.
Yeah, absolutely. Alhamdulillah, we got some very engaged audience today. So this person has a comment and asking a
Mhm.
question. So I'll display the comment here. I think the hubby's leadership role plays a big part to deliver on the rights of the wife. But when you start talking equality, the unintended consequence is that the woman is left to fend for herself. And then, sort of following up on that, with the question is, can you touch on the roles of each gender, and is there anything as masculinity and femininity, and how does that tie into the conversation?
Okay. I don't think we have another hour, but let's look at this. So we can. I mean, it's very easy to, if you're concerned about the roles that Islam has for each gender, then I mean you can read up on that, you can study that, you can speak to an imam or a sheikh, and they'll be very clear on describing that for you, right? But when as a husband, you do have a responsibility for sticking up for your wife if she's being abused in your home. I will say that much. Women can stand up for themselves. Absolutely. They're not these fragile things that might be broken. They're very capable of standing up for themselves. Women are key players in society. They're key players within the home. They need to have the respect that they are entitled to, that Islam gives them. But when we have a joint family system, sometimes that can be overlooked, and sometimes um, the husband, in an effort to not upset his parents, may stay silent. And I think that right there is a problem, because standing up for your wife doesn't mean you have to go and fight with your parents. It simply means that you have to put boundaries in place and let them know, um, you're my parents and I love you. You're not allowed to speak to my spouse that way. And with the spouse, very clear boundaries. You're my responsibility. If there's a problem, come to me. Don't go take it out on my parents. These are really important conversations that need to be had. And unfortunately, we're not taught from an early age how to regulate our own emotions. And so when things happen and conflict occurs and there's friction and there's emotions that get built up, we end up taking them out on the people closest to us. And sometimes, they're directed in people that may have nothing to do with the situation, but it's because we haven't been able to regulate our own emotions. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on each individual when it comes to navigating the relationship with your in-laws. We need to master our own emotions so that we don't wrongly take out something on someone else. But at the same time, we need to put boundaries in place. We need to be very clear and be on the same page with our spouse so that there's an understanding of how we're going to navigate the relationship with your parents and how we're going to navigate the relationship with my parents. And parents ought to have that understanding so that they're on the same page. How are we going to navigate the relationship with this new member in the home? And how are we going to offer them the comfort to consider this their home? How are we going to offer them the space to feel comfortable enough to move within the home as if it is their home, not as if they're a guest and not as if they're an outsider. It's on the parents' responsibility to create that space, but then it's also this responsibility of the new person coming in to look at how things are within that home and try to navigate without offending someone else. Very delicate, but it can be done.
Well said, Sister Fozia. Well said. And I think to kind of maybe wrap it up, unless Producer Kash, if there's any more questions from the audience. So this has been a difficult conversation to have, and we don't ever profess to have all the answers. And some of what we may say may be flat out wrong, but it's these challenging discussions that have to be had. And we do so to benefit Canadian Muslim families or individuals or singles, couples, the heart of what a family could be, with an Islamic lens, with a lens to the Muslim family. But I always implore, and I've done this in past episodes, take a look at the Sira of the Prophet Muhammad. Have a read of the Quran. Look back at the history. When you look at when the question was posited about roles on masculinity and femininity and masculinity, you just have to look at the Sahaba. You have to look at our prophet. You have to look at past prophets, whether it's Musa, Ibrahim, Nuh alayhi salam, Noah. I'll mention some of the English names because this whole podcast is done in English. You look at Abraham, you look at Jesus. These are some of the other, prophets, and you look at what they've done in their lives. They all had wives, they all had families, and just the strength. You look at Asiya, the wife of the Pharaoh. Can you imagine how she continually stood up to him? She was the stepmother of Musa alayhi salam. You look at Abraham and Sarah and some of what they went through when Sarah was going back and forth in the desert, and she commanded literally the water to stop. Zam zam. It means in Arabic to stop, stop. And I've heard from various scholars, if she were not to have commanded the water to stop, believe it or not, this whole world would have been flooded with Zamzam water. It would have been a very different place than what we are today. So you look at some of these, stories, and there's so much history there to be had that we can, contextualize, make it current. The Quran itself is a book, a holy book that will be there till the end of time. That's one of God's promises. So there are many, many resources. Speak with an imam. Definitely, look to Sister Fozia to help any kind of strategies, any advice on managing stress. Speak to some people at the masjid or the mosque or other areas, and other therapists or psychotherapists that can help. Healing and faith and healing go hand in hand. They're not isolated, and no one should suffer in silence, regardless.
Absolutely.
Whether they're going through a relationship struggle or a struggle around mental health, mental well-being. So I'll wrap it up there.
Okay.
We've come very close to the 1 hour mark. Sister Fozia, thank you so very much for this, for being our guest today.
Absolutely. Can I add one thing though? And I know you want to just wrap it up. I just want to leave everyone on a positive note, something that you can actually go home, or if you're at home, something that you can do right now. Because we talked about a lot of we really discussed some issues and challenges. But if you're living with someone, Allah also likes when you do something for the sake of Allah, and no one else needs to know that you're doing it. No one else needs to know why you're doing it, but you're doing something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and maybe you're doing something to help one of his creations, right? So if you are living in a joint family system and perhaps you have some challenges, let's try to do some little things that maybe the other person would appreciate, that you don't need to point out, I did this for you. So for example, if they go out, if someone of family member goes out and it's getting late coming back, make sure that you have the front light on outside, so when they come in, the house is lit up, so they're not navigating through the dark. Maybe if someone likes to drink cold water, have cold water in the fridge. So when they go to drink water, they don't have to add ice in it. It's already cold for them. Maybe someone likes to have a certain type of meal. Every once in a while, if you can create, like, make that meal for them, you don't have to say, I made this for you. You're doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you pray that Allah blesses the relationships within your home. But we do our part to try to make the other person feel comfortable, to try to make it easy for the other person. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make things easy for us.
Ameen, Ameen, Ameen. And I'll end on that note, Sister Fazia. So I do thank everyone watching this episode, our weekly live stream here from the Happy Strong Family studio within Masjid Darul Iman. Tune in and tune in often. We produce the show every Sunday, tackling some of the most challenging questions and topics and issues around the family. So I'll be signing off for now. This is Mushtaq. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to all the viewers here and on YouTube as well.